Our topic this afternoon is reversing diabetes without drugs. Do you know someone that has diabetes? Do you? What happens to these people as they develop their diabetes? Do they find a drug that cures it? Are they going to be diabetics for the rest of their lives? Do they take more and more medications? Do they have more and more complications? What happens to diabetics? What happens to them physically, mentally, health-wise? What happens to them? They deteriorate. How do they deteriorate? What happens to them? It affects their eyes, their mind, their ears, their heart, their kidneys, their feet. They lose their legs. Diabetes is the mother of all chronic diseases. There's probably nothing worse than diabetes. And yet, it is estimated that every second American adult either has diabetes already or is a pre-diabetic with a 30% chance for those that are overweight of becoming a diabetic within 3 years. What is it, pre-diabetic? What does it mean? What does it mean to be a diabetic? How do you define a diabetic? Let's take a look at this. First of all, let me show you what has happened since 1990. This is 1994. These are the different states. And you see here about 5% of all the adults in America, 1994, have diabetes. 3 years later, it's 6%. 3 years later, it's 7%. 3 years later, it's 8%. 3 years later, it's 9%. 3 years later, it's 10%. And today, we estimate that about 12% of the American population has diabetes. Let me remind you of this chart that I showed you a few days ago on obesity. Do you remember what I showed you then? I showed you that the diabetes increased dramatically from 1985. It was then 8%, then 5 years later 13%, 5 years later 18%, 5 years later 23%, 5 years later 28%, 5 years later 33%. Do you see the parallel? Obesity and diabetes are cousins. When you are suffering from overweight and obesity, you are a sitting duck for diabetes. And chances are that you already have diabetes and you don't even know it. Many people are pre-diabetics. That means if they're overweight in the next 3 years, they probably have a 30% chance of developing full-blown diabetes. And so the obesity issue is a very big issue. Because once you are obese, the chances of diabetes for very obese people is 7 times higher than if you're normal weight. Here you see what happened in the last 20 years alone. We see a dramatic increase in diabetes by 300%. Diabetes is 3 times more common in just 20 years than it was 20 years ago. And I made the point, this is not a genetic disease. Just because your grandmother had diabetes and your mother had diabetes doesn't mean that you have to become a diabetic. You may have a predisposition towards diabetes, but you don't have to become a diabetic because you can make some changes and you don't have to become a diabetes, even though it may run in your family. And chances are that it runs in your family because of the recipes that are being passed on from one generation to the next. So diabetes has been advancing, doubling every 15 years in America. And the chance of becoming a diabetic in the United States for a newborn baby in a lifetime is now 1 out of 3. And for people, for Hispanic parents, the babies born, the chances are 1 out of 2 that these babies will become in a lifetime diabetics. And yet we have no medical answer to this problem. So in America today, we have about 30 million diabetics, plus we have 86 pre-diabetics, which means we have 116 million Americans that are either diabetics or pre-diabetics. And 28% of the diabetics don't even know that they have diabetes. So if you have 116 million Americans that are either diabetics or pre-diabetics, how many people live in America today? What's the number? What's the number of people that we have in this country? Folks, you tell me. I'm a foreigner. I'm a German. You tell me, how many people live in America? How many? Well, about 300. What is your name, sir? You are on tonight. Please come. Please come. I've been looking for you. I'm so glad to see you here. Yes, we have about 330 340 million Americans, and out of 300 some million people, 116 million are diabetics or pre-diabetics. That means every second adult is a diabetic or pre-diabetic. I really enjoyed this gentleman here the other day. He's actually one of my friends and colleagues. He comes from Loma Linda. We trained there together. This gentleman is a gentleman that works for...
I work for the state, but I have to make it very clear that I only represent myself. So when I get up and speak, because I'm not speaking on half of the state.
It's okay. So we have set aside about 4 minutes this afternoon to tell us something about, is there a real crisis in terms of the diseases, chronic diseases in this state? And I've asked an epidemiologist, a person that studies and is familiar with the epidemics that we have, to give us some idea. How does this beautiful state rank when it comes to certain diseases and health? And so listen very carefully, because it might give us some ideas of that we can improve our ranking.
Well, I went to your lecture this morning, and I noticed that he handed me the mic, so he trusts me a little bit. I don't know. Yeah. Just a little bit. Okay. So as far as the diseases here in this state, West Virginia, out of 20 measures of health, West Virginia ranks dead last in about 17 of those 20 measures of health. And those measures of health include obesity, that you just spoke about. And if it weren't for Mississippi, we might be number 1. But we're at least number 2, and we bounce back and forth. So you looked at the map that you showed up there today. We're the deep red part. So, and I'm going to say this too. We're very high in smoking, very high in diabetes. Just as you said, they go hand in hand very well together. So we have some very, very serious health problems in this state. In fact, I think we're to the point, at least with the opioid epidemic and a lot of other issues that we are facing right now, that we're really at a tipping point as a state. We could go one way or the other. We're really looking at almost societal collapse. It's getting to that point. Because if you think about it, this is the only state in the Union where we are decreasing in population. When you get old, and I'm saying that, who's going to take care of you? Who's going to help you? Where are these young people going to come from that are taking care of you? So many now are addicted to drugs. So many of the children that are heavily impacted from their mother's opioid abuse.
What are opioids?
Opioids, heroin, Opanas, any of the pharmaceutical companies that have literally dumped massive amounts of these opioids on this state. Shame on them for what they've done to us.
So this is for pain relief. Explain that to them.
So a lot of what has taken place here, people have worked hard. West Virginians are hard-working people. And just in case you don't know, West Virginia is a very white state, about 93.4% or 6%, about 3.6% African American. But these people worked in the coal mines. They've worked hard labor jobs. And so they get injuries, and they want to find treatment for that pain. So the doctor came and gave them these pharmaceuticals. They got addicted to them, and then suddenly the USDA and FDA and everybody else started coming down on these doctors that were prescribing these drugs and said, no, you can't do this anymore. And so then somebody comes along and says, well, I got just the thing for you, heroin. So then they moved on to the heroin, the fentanyls, and the carfentanyls. These drugs are 50 to 100 times more powerful than normal opioid drugs. So your brain wasn't designed to combat this. One hit of that stuff, you're hooked. You can't get out. Anyway, but we have so many health issues. Smoking, tobacco consumption were one of the highest. I looked at the national average just the other day. About 16% of people at the nation's average use tobacco. We're so much higher in this state. So we really need, Hans, we need what the program that you have is what these people need. And people need Jesus Christ. because I'm going to tell you that's the only way you're going to get rid of these drugs. That's the only way you're going to get off of them.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, thank you, Bill. Thank you, Mr. Hoffman, for being with us and giving us a pretty clear picture that there's a lot of room for improvement, right? There's a lot of room for improvement. Let's be very, very conservative in how we use drugs. I'm talking about prescription drugs. Let us ask the doctor, what are the side effects? What do I have to be concerned about? Is there something else I can do? Yes, you have some pain. Don't just rush in for these opioids because they progressively lead to other things. But sometimes we have to perhaps bite the bullet and say, yes, I'm going to have some pain for 2-3 days, but I'm going to be okay. Instead of just going through it easily and then having to face the consequences. So thank you so much for being with us today. I really appreciate that. I was looking for you, but then I saw you there. So thank you so much. So in America, every second adult, I mean, think about this. I don't know how many people are here, but every second person either is a diabetic or a pre-diabetic. Think about this. You may not even know that you are, because 28% don't know that they are diabetics. So let's take a look at, how do you know you're diabetic? How do you suspect you might be a diabetic? What are some of the symptoms? Take a look. You can read this there. This is a reading test. Okay? So a diabetic is usually very thirsty. They're thirsty all the time. And because they're thirsty, they drink more, they go to the bathroom more often. So they have frequent urination. And they also are usually very hungry. Diabetics are always hungry. They eat, and they're still hungry. It's not that they have no willpower, it's the disease process that's causing it. And so then you also have to worry about blurred eyesight. You begin to not see things clearly. It's sort of getting a little bit dark, the twilight zone, and all of a sudden things are blurred, and you begin to realize, well, maybe it's just getting dark. No. Have your eyes checked. It might be a symptom of diabetes. And then you feel tired all the time. I mean, there can be many reasons for feeling tired, but one of the reasons for diabetes is that you feel tired. Of course, when you carry all that extra weight, you're bound to feel tired. I mean, can you imagine you weigh an extra 70, 80 pounds? It's like carrying 2 suitcases with you all day long. Wouldn't you be tired at night? Wouldn't you be tired during the daytime? And then, of course, you also oftentimes have this funny feeling in your fingers and in your toes, so a tingling feeling. And then for men, it's usually erectile dysfunction, and of course you know what that is. That is sort of the beginning of impotence. That's oftentimes the very first sign that a man is possibly affected by diabetes. These are symptoms, but what are the actual definitions of diabetes? Because anybody can say, well, I have a little bit of tingling in my fingers, and I'm kind of tired, therefore I must be diabetes affected. No, there's special criteria of how to identify whether you are a diabetic. How does your physician identify you as a diabetic? What are the numbers? Just read it off the chart. You have a blood sugar level on the right-hand side. The blood sugar level, the glucose, is over 125. So when you have your blood checked and your fasting blood is over 125 and you have it twice at that level, you are probably a diabetic. And if you have a blood sugar between 100 and 125, then you're probably a pre-diabetic. A normal person, a person that has normal blood sugars, is anybody under 100 for fasting blood sugar. Now, there's some other numbers that we can look at, but let us just zero in on blood sugar levels. So we said anything below 100 is healthy, it's normal, it's good. Anything above 125 is, anything in between 100 and 125 is, and if you're overweight and you're pre-diabetic, the chance of becoming a full-blown diabetic is 30% within 3 years. Oh, hypoglycemic, yeah, that's oftentimes what we find when you are at a 45 or 50 thereabouts, yeah. Okay. So when we look at diabetes, we begin to also understand that diabetes contributes to atherosclerosis. Do you remember the video that I showed you with the beating heart? Diabetes promotes atherosclerosis. Diabetes promotes the narrowing and hardening of the arteries. How many miles of blood vessels does the human body have, roughly? How many miles? 60,000 miles. And of course, we talked about the idea that most of these are 1/10 in thickness of your hair. And I told you that we are wonderfully and fearfully made. We're the engineering marvel. We are number one in the engineering. And don't put secondary food into your body when you are number one built. And number one foods are fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, and some nuts and seeds. Good. You are a very scholarly group of people. You've learned your lesson very, very well. Okay, so diabetes is one of the significant contributors of atherosclerosis and all the diseases that have to do with the arterial degeneration that takes place, such as a narrowing of the arteries. Diabetes promotes the progressive narrowing of the space inside the artery vessel. You see, the space becomes less and less, and it's becoming more and more blocked. When you're 45 years of age, you already have 65% narrowing of these special major vessels. And diabetes contributes to that process. Diabetes accelerates that process. Diabetes makes it worse. So now, I want to ask you a question. If diabetes worsens the narrowing and the hardening of the arteries, would you expect more problems with the vessels to the brain? Yes. Would you expect more strokes as diabetics? Yes. Would you expect more mental deterioration as diabetics? Yes. Would you possibly also have probably an effect on spirituality when you're diabetic, because the arteries now are beginning to get narrowed and the blood cannot bring away the nutrients to the center where God communicates with us, right behind the forehead? Does it? Yes. What about the coronary arteries? Do the arteries clog up to the heart more readily in diabetics? Yes. You have 2 to 4 times more heart attacks. Then you're looking at the kidney arteries. We call them renal arteries. The kidneys. Do diabetics have more renal disease, kidney disease? Yes, 18 times more kidney disease than people that don't have diabetes. And then you look at femoral arteries, the arteries to the leg. What happens there? Do diabetics have more amputations of the toes because of poor circulation, of the feet, of the legs? Diabetic men have more to worry about impotence. Yes, it's oftentimes the first sign that something is not working in the arteries anymore. Diabetes is the potent promoter of atherosclerosis, the number one cause of blindness in diabetes. Kidney disease, 18 times more. Heart disease and stroke, 2 to 4 times more. Impotence in men, oftentimes the first sign. Foot and leg amputation, the number one cause aside from industrial accidents. And hearing impairment. This is what a diabetic has to face. Do you want to be a diabetic? If you are, do you want to change? Do you want to face the music like this? Up to 80% of the diabetics die from atherosclerosis-related diseases. They don't die from diabetes. They die from the complications affecting the arteries. So therefore, we must control these risk factors. And what are the risk factors? Cholesterol, high blood pressure. Do something about smoking. We have to do something about overweight. We have to do something about lack of exercise. All these things conspire together to create this environment where diabetes then can take over more and more. And please remember, as we suggested to you earlier, most of these risk factors that are now also affecting diabetes are under the control of our lips. 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 Lips get us into a lot of trouble. Perverted appetite. Perverted appetite, and we think, well, I enjoy my food. I do what I want to do. Yes, of course you can. But you pay the piper. You pay for the music that's coming your way. Especially with overweight, diabetes, powerful disease. One of the worst diseases you could ever have. And please note, it's not only that you have to worry about all these diseases and you gradually die slowly. That's what you do, one organ at a time. On top of that, a diabetic usually lives 10 to 15 years of a shorter life. So you not only live at a lower quality of life, your health is impaired, you now die longer, slower. And when you die, it's usually 10 to 15 years less time than a person who's not a diabetic. So that's why I said to you earlier, I don't want to be too dramatic, but what can I do to really wake us up and say, this is the mother of all chronic diseases, and it's totally stoppable and reversible. All you have to do is change what you put at the end of your fork. Talk to the management here of the camp and say, we want to have really healthy foods. Amen. Well, it's not really too bad, but folks, there's no place for strippers when you are diabetic. There's no room for these potato, what do you call these little things? Tater tots, yeah. There's no room for this. Folks, we need to begin to think about, we have a responsibility not only to ourselves, but also to those that we bring to the camp here. And I say that with great loving care. I appreciate what people do here. They are just not aware of it. They don't do that purposefully. They don't bring you here so they can poison you. No. It's not that bad anyway. But you know, we need to develop more awareness. And that's why we have people in the State Department that are coming, in the state, that are coming to us, and they help us to understand we're at a very, very high risk in 17 out of 20 health measures. We are number one. I mean, the worst. You don't want to be number one when it comes to health or disease. You want to be the best. And we can improve. Now I've given you enough bad news now, right? I mean, I've been scaring you half to death now, haven't I? I just wanted to get your attention. And that is to say, I have some good news for you now too. And that is that some 50 to 75% of type 2 diabetics on insulin and 80 to 90% of those on pills could normalize their blood sugars and be off medication within weeks if they change their diet. I didn't say that. This comes from one of the foremost diabetologists in the country, Dr. James Anderson, a personal friend of mine. He's a professor of nutrition at the VA hospital in Kentucky there, at the university there. He has written over 500 scientific articles, written many, many books, and he has said over and over again, people don't have to be type 2 diabetics if they're just willing to make some changes. But there's no one there that really teaches the people what they need to know. Because all we do as doctors, we have 10, 15 minutes time to see a diabetic, and we can peddle our pills, and that's it. And we say, change your diet, lose weight, but people don't know how to change their diet. People don't know how to lose weight. They need to have 20, 30 hours of instruction. They have to have a group process. It's hard to change in our culture that tells you, eat, drink, and be merry, and tomorrow the doctors will take care of you. They can't. But you don't know what to do. Isn't that right? And that's why we developed a CHIP program where you have 30 hours of education. We just have about 13 hours this week here together. But you see, you begin to pull some of the things now together slowly, aren't you? Yeah. Somebody came to me and said, so tell me about this cholesterol. So if I'm a vegetarian, that means I have low cholesterol, right? Why is that wrong? What causes the cholesterol? What fat? Saturated fat. Where do you find saturated fat? In animal products, but also in palm oil and coconut oil. Oh, really? Yeah. We've been totally brainwashed that coconut oil is something natural. That's what God made for us. God made coconuts, not coconut oil. The American Heart Association is recommending coconut oil to be used on your skin and on your scalp, but never put it inside the body, they say. That's exactly right. It is the very worst fat that you can ever put into your body because 92.5% saturation. And just to give you some idea, beef tallow, beef fat is only 50% saturation, and olive oil is 15% saturation. But coconut oil is how much? 92.5%. Use it on your skin, it's fine. It gives you a nice soft skin. Put it on your scalp, it's fine. Don't put it inside your body, in spite of what they tell you on television and all these kind of things. It's brainwashing, it's marketing, because these coconuts are very, very cheap to produce in Malaysia, in Indonesia. That's where they come from most of the time. And then they have a lot of profit margin on these coconut oils, and they can put a lot of money into advertising, and brainwashing you. They tell you it helps you with your Alzheimer's and all these things. There's no scientific data. It's just a fantasy. When it comes to talking about coconut oil, that's always the least expected item in my audiences. I said, oh no, coconut is good. I know it's good. I'm putting it into my dishes now. Be careful. God made coconuts, not coconut oil. That's a man-made food. God made olives. He didn't make olive oil. That's another shocker, isn't it? Because we've been brainwashed to believe that coconut is good for you. Be careful. I mean, a little bit of olive oil doesn't really harm you, but be careful. Remember, I'm giving you something here to think about. Every gram of fat has 9 calories. How many calories? Every gram of fat has 9 calories. You have sunflower oil. 1 gram of sunflower oil has how many calories? 9 calories. Corn oil. 1 gram of corn oil has how many calories? 9 calories. 1 gram of palm oil has how many calories? 9 calories. 1 gram of coconut oil has how many calories? 9 calories. 1 gram of olive oil has how many calories? 9. Why do you want to eat something that is making you fat that has 9 calories per gram? That's more than anything else. Starch only has 4 calories per gram. Be careful with the amount of oil that you eat, even if you think it's a good oil, like olive oil. Use it in small amounts. God didn't make olive oil, He made olives. We made olive oil. It was used in the Old Testament, in the Bible, for very sacred functions. They wouldn't use a commonly used oil for these sacred functions that were used to anoint kings. We've been brainwashed. We're an obese society, and we still think, well, olive oil is okay. Every gram has how many calories? Okay. I hope you got the message. Now, if you really want to understand this whole issue of diabetes, we have to talk a little bit about insulin. What is insulin, and what does it do? Insulin, you have heard about it. It is produced by one of the glands, the pancreatic glands. The pancreas producing it, and the insulin is sort of a key that unlocks the doors. Or it's like when I go to my hotel room, I have a special card, and I slide it down, and it opens the doors magically. That's what insulin does. Insulin is a biochemical messenger that is sent to every one of your 100 trillion cells in your body. It has a magical ability, like a key, to open the doors of every one of these cells that make up you. Now let me show you what I mean. So let's just take a look at this here. This is a normal person. This is not a diabetic. This is a kind of a slender person. There's a pancreas here. It's usually right here. And the pancreas produces insulin. The insulin then goes to the cells, through the bloodstream, to every cell. And the insulin, like you see here, a little triangle, it's like the door opener. It's the key that pushes open the gates on this cell here. This is a cell here. It opens up the gates, and then the glucose, that's the blood sugar, that's the gasoline for the human body. Without gasoline, you cannot run a car. Without glucose, you cannot run a person. You cannot run an operation. So glucose is totally essential. That's the currency that the body uses to have the energy. So the glucose has to go from the blood inside of the cell where it can do the work. So when that glucose goes inside the cell, everything is perfect. Everything is working well. You feel energy. You feel fully alive. Okay, now this is now what we call a type 1 diabetic. Okay? Type 1 diabetes is fairly rare. It afflicts about 5% of all the diabetics. So today we're going to talk about type 2 diabetes, which affects it's in the majority of all the diabetics. 90% of all the diabetes is type 2. So we'll talk about type 2, but let me talk to you about type 1. Type 1, you have a person. Is that person large or is that person slender? Slender, right? Okay, is there a pancreas here? Yes. Is it working? No. So when the pancreas doesn't work, it doesn't produce any insulin, right? So when you don't produce any insulin, then the insulin can no longer be the key to open up these doors here of the cell, and the blood sugar, the glucose, is building up on the outside of the cell, and the cell is starving for fuel and will actually begin to die. And so if you don't have insulin being produced by your body, you go into a coma and you die because you don't bring the glucose into the cells where it's needed. Fortunately, we have developed insulin that we can inject, and so type 1 diabetics can live a fairly normal life, particularly if they adopt a vegetarian lifestyle to prevent the complications later on in life. So type 1 diabetics can live a very normal life thanks to the advances in developing insulin that can be injected. Now I come to you and talk to you about type 2 diabetes. What do you see here? Is this person large or slender? It's large. So a type 2 diabetic is usually large. And is the pancreas working? It's working very, very effectively. It's working very, very hard. You're producing more insulin here in an early diabetic than you will have in a normal person. So type 2 diabetes is not an insulin deficiency or lack of insulin. The diabetic early diagnosed is usually carrying more, producing more insulin than anybody else. So this is a different kind of a disease and differentiates itself from type 1 diabetes. But please take a look here. So you have a pancreas, it's working very well, it's producing insulin, and the insulin is now going to all the cells of the body. Lots of insulin is there. It tries to open up the doors, it tries to stick the key into the lock, and half the time it doesn't work. What happened? Somebody came along and put some chewing gum into the lock. And so when you put the key in, it doesn't work. Or with my illustration with the hotel room, I slide the card through the slot and somehow somebody has put something into the slot. It doesn't go through properly. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. That's what we call type 2 diabetes. The locks have been gummed up. I'll tell you in a few moments what that really means. But you see, some of the glucose is inside, but some of it is outside. So the more is outside, the higher the number of glucose when you have your test done. So the more of these glucose you can get into inside, the lower the numbers in the blood will be, and you become more and more normal. So the issue then is to get these glucose molecules, to get them into the inside of the cell, but that doesn't happen when you're type 2 diabetic because the locks are gummed up. Now, they don't really use real chewing gum. What happens here is that when you are obese and when you eat a lot of fats and oils and grease, it gets into the cells, especially the muscle cells. And when it gets into the muscle cells, it no longer communicates properly to get the doors opened. So once you get the fat out of your bloodstream, once you get the fat reduced on your body, your diabetes disappears. It's the amount of fat. People always say, well, it's the sugar. No, the sugar is not the big issue. We have been misled by this. This is the old ideas. How did we ever get on the idea that sugar causes diabetes? Well, it started many, many years ago when the pharaohs in Egypt, when they didn't feel too well, they would call the priest. The priest then was the physician. And the priest would usually ask the pharaoh, "Sir, would you please give me some urine sample?" So the pharaoh, the king, would provide a urine sample, and the priest, that was the physician then, would pour it on the sand outdoors, and if the ants were attracted to the urine, then, sir, I'm sorry to tell you, but you have sweet urine, you have diabetes. That's how we got this idea. When you become a severe diabetic, ultimately the sugar begins to spill into, the glucose spills into the urine, and the urine begins to taste sweet. I remember my professor told us one time, he said, he told the class, he said, now if you are somewhere in Africa and you have nothing to test for diabetes, what would you do? And you don't have any ants there, you don't know what to really do. Does this person have diabetes or not? And he said, well, here's what you do. And he took a test tube and he said, this is the urine, but I don't know if it's a urine of a diabetic or non-diabetic. How would you know? Well, he said, all you have to do is stick your finger in and taste it, and you will know if you're diabetic or not. So then the student said, well, sir, but we don't know. We have to have a different sample. We don't know, is this really the diabetic sweet urine, or is this the normal urine? And he said, okay, then you have to have a second tube, and so now you taste that one too. And so he stuck his finger in, and he said, no, this is not the sweet urine. This is the normal. And then he said, anybody wants to try it? And there's always one young man that wants to impress the girls in the class. Oh yes, we can do this. And so he stuck his finger in, he tasted it, and he said, well, I don't know if it's sweet or not. Well, let me test the other one. So the other one, oh, that was the sweet one. He said, yeah, this is the diabetic. And everybody applauded for being so courageous. And the professor said, didn't you notice? I took a test tube, and I stuck this finger in, but I licked this one. And he said, it is so important to be very observant. Observe, observe, observe. So now, when it comes to diabetes, we already said 90% of all the diabetics are type 2 diabetics. We used to think of them as being adult onset. These are usually people, when I went to school, we were taught, when you see a person that's 60 years of age and is large, that person is probably a diabetic. You better check it out. Today, we're checking out people that are 50 years of age and large, 40 years of age and large, 30 years and large, 20 years and large, 15 years and large. We used to call them, at one time we thought they were probably juvenile diabetics. Now we call them type 2 adult onset diabetics, because the diabetes has taken over all the age groups in our society. And it all has to do with largeness, with the size of the body. If you are large and you're 16 years of age, you can be what we used to call an adult onset diabetics that we usually looked for when they were 60 years of age. Now they're 16 years of age. And most of these people are either on pills, 62%, or on insulin, and some of these people are on pills and insulin, and yet we have to recognize that drugs do not cure diabetes. They don't stop the epidemic. Actually, these drugs may be harmful because they can lead to other very significant side effects. We have many of these drugs, they come and they are promoted by the industry on television and everything else. We finally got the best drug. And so people buy them, the doctors prescribe them, and 2-3 years later, we begin to understand there are lots of side effects. A lot of people have died because of the drugs, and then the drug disappears very quietly. You'll never hear anything about it again. Nobody says, it was the wrong drug. No, it's gone. But we look for a new drug. And after a while, that disappears. And we have new drugs all the time. We don't have an answer to type 2 diabetes. We have nothing to cure this disease. But you can in weeks. And once you are on these medications and you don't change your diet, you will die with these medications, usually more and more and more. You will be ultimately ending up on insulin and more insulin, every year more insulin, and you will die with insulin on board. It does not cure. Have I come through clearly? I hope you catch my passion of wanting to turn this disease around. And I cannot do it with my medical colleagues because they're still in the old concepts. But the concepts are now beginning to take root among some of the younger physicians. But it's all too slow because in the meantime, thousands and millions of people are dying from diabetes. Not just in America, around the world. This is what we do when it comes to diabetes. What do you see here? We've talked about that before, didn't we? We treat the symptoms, we give them all kinds of medications, we're wiping the water off the ground, we're trying to keep the floor dry, but nobody really recognizes, hey, there's some leaky pipes. We have to take care of the leaking pipes. We have to take care of the food. It's the food. This is a food-borne illness. This is a food-made disease. If we take care of the food in a different way, the disease disappears in weeks, in most cases. Well, let me make my case. Let me take you to Japan. Diabetes was very, very rare in Japan. Diabetes, even today, is very rare around the world where you have a very, very simple diet where people live on a starchy diet. Did you hear me? What are we telling people usually with diabetes? Don't eat the starch. The starch turns into? That's only refined starch. That's white flour cereal, grains. But when you take whole grains, you take brown rice, it works very well. When you take barley, it works very well. When you take beans, it works very well. Why? Because they all have the original native fiber accompanying the food as God designed it. But when you refine the food and you remove the fiber, the starch turns very quickly into sugar. But when you have fiber with the starch, it takes 2, 3, 4, 5 hours before it turns into sugar, and the body can handle it very, very well. It knows exactly how much of insulin to release, and you're just absolutely fine. We put people on these high starch diets. 70% of what they eat is starch, but as it comes in nature, and the people say, we have never felt so good. The diabetes is gone within 3 days. The physicians have to reduce the insulin by 3-4 units every day. Fiber is magic. Fiber is fabulous. Fiber was designed by God to help us not to fall into the trap of diabetes. Does sugar have fiber? No. Is it getting digested very rapidly? Yes. It's too fast, and the pancreas doesn't know how much insulin to push out into the system. And that's why you have all these problems. So let's go to Japan. Japan is rare. It is a country where diabetes is very, very rare. Before 1960, less than 1% of the Japanese adults had diabetes. Today, it's more than 15%. In just 50 years, we've seen an increase in diabetes by 15 times in Japan. What changed in Japan? Let's take a look. America brought not only General MacArthur to Japan, but America also brought McDonald's, the other Mac, to Japan. And with that, all the American dietary things, especially those big steaks that they began to love. Okay? Let's take a look here. This is what you see in Japan, 1960, you see a dramatic decline in eating carbohydrates, the starches, the decline in rice, decline in some of these starchy foods. At the same time, you see a dramatic increase in fat consumption, more and more meat, more and more fat, more and more oil. And you see the dramatic change, less of these healthy carbs, these healthy starches, and more of the fats in the diet. And what happens next? You see the red line here? The red line is the weight. You see the weight crept up. 1960 it was 4% in the population, and then 40 years later it was 30% of the Japanese population is now overweight. The Japanese used to always be slender, right? Just like the Chinese. But now you look at the Chinese, they're all looking like this. The Japanese are beginning to look more and more like this. There's still lots of slender Japanese out there, but you have a lot of the Japanese now that have gained a lot of weight. And as the weight goes up, take a look at the yellow line here. The yellow line is diabetes. The prevalence of diabetes goes up and up. It used to be less than 1%. 30, 40 years later, it's now 25 to 30% of the Japanese adults have diabetes. Do you see how these two lines are running parallel? Do you remember I said to you, obesity and diabetes are cousins? They're running in the same school. So anyone that's extra weight, folks, let me entreat you. Be careful, because you're building your case potentially for diabetes. We already talked about this here. We have pointed out that the diet today in America, about half of what we eat has no nutritional value. It is very, very low in fiber. The fiber consumption in America is 10 to 12 grams. We should have more like 40 or 50 grams. Where do you find fiber? Do you find fiber in cheese? Zero. Do you find fiber in meat? Zero. Do you find fiber in sausages? Zero. Do you find fiber in sugar? Zero. Do you find fiber in oil? Zero. Do you find fiber in plants? Yes. Where? Everywhere. And particularly legumes and grains. Okay? Whole grains. And once you have enough fiber, wonderful things happen to you, as you know. Right? You're on the move. You have a daily bowel movement. You don't have to wait a whole week before something finally comes out. No. It's easy. Because you have the fiber and you have the water. That's why we recommend, be sure you get your 8, 9, 10 glasses of water. Cleanse the body. And sometimes when you feel hungry, it's probably not even a hunger drive that is kicking in, but your body is thirsty. It's actually asking for water and not for calories, but we misinterpret that and we think, oh, I'm hungry. Let us be more careful about these things. We talked to you about when you have refined potatoes like Pringles, you take one tube, that's 63% fat, that's 1,000 calories, and you can have 10 potatoes, which is virtually 0 fat. Please just don't put the butter and the sour cream and the cheese, and only God knows what we hide inside these beautiful, nutritious, royal packages called baked potatoes. We talked about it several times now. 50% of the calories that we eat comes from engineered, refined, processed foods that have nutrition labels. And we suggested to you, don't eat foods that have nutrition labels too often. So somebody came to me and said, do the Loma Linda foods have nutrition labels? Write out your questions. We're collecting them in the next 20 minutes. And we're asking you to submit your questions in writing about things that we have talked about, and I will answer them tomorrow afternoon. Okay? That will be the big time. And I hope that nobody from the Loma Linda Foods Company is here when I answer the question. Actually, I'm going to be a very nice boy tomorrow. I'll give you a very diplomatic answer. Okay? No. We're giving you some honest answers tomorrow, but it's not exactly what you expect. Okay? But please also note that only 14% of the calories that we eat comes from foods that come out of the hand of God. God made 14% of all the calories that we eat. Everything else comes from somebody else's workshop. And it's the 14% of the calories that consist of fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, maybe a few nuts and some seeds. And these foods are high in fiber and low in calories. You got it? They're high in fiber, they're high in nutrition. That's where the best nutrition is that you can ever find. But it's low in calories, so you can eat all you want and you don't have to ever worry about gaining weight. As a matter of fact, some of you will come to me and say, well, I'm losing too much weight. Well, actually, the body begins to modify itself after a while. And if somebody comes to me and says, well, actually, I'm already kind of on the lean side, what shall I do? I need to gain some weight. If I eat this way, I'm going to lose more weight. Well, maybe you do. And then I tell people, well, eat more soups that are like stew. How do you turn soup into a stew? What do you add? You eat beans, what else? Potatoes, rice, barley. These are the kind of things, these add the calories that you want to have if you want to gain some weight, if you want to boost it a little bit. And then I also tell people that want to gain weight, cut back on raw salads. Salads are very good nutritionally, but they don't have any calories unless you pour all the blue cheese on top, which is not what you want to do. So then I tell people, well, for instance, if you have zucchini, you can eat zucchini raw, or you can cook it. If you cook it, you can probably get 5 times more in because it collapses, sort of. So these are some little guidelines that we can give to people. There's some other things that we can recommend of how to gain weight if that is a real problem. If you have any concerns about this, see me afterwards and I give you some suggestions. So what can we do to turn this disease epidemic around? This is Loma Linda here. You know already the story. Adventists that are meat eaters have 4 times more diabetes than people that are vegetarians. So if you want to do something about diabetes, what do? What color do you choose? The green color. To be moving towards a plant-based whole food diet. It's very important for you to understand this. It's not enough to become a vegetarian. You have to also become a whole food-oriented person. Don't become a junk food vegetarian. There are lots of people like this. They go, well, I don't eat my friends. I am not eating animals. I don't eat meat. Pass M&Ms. Pass the potato chips. Folks, that's a junk food vegetarian. That's not healthy. A plane has to use 2 wings to fly. To be healthy, you have to be a vegetarian and whole foods. Because that's where also the fiber is and the nutrients. So let me just quickly run through some very interesting research that goes back to 1927. Here's a physician, and he wanted to see what the effect is of different diets. So he gave medical students, he gave them for 2 weeks a high-fat diet, very, very high fat. The fat content in America usually is about 35% roughly. This is 65, so this is lots of fat, lots of grease. So when they put butter on their bread, it was sort of a 1/4 inch thick. When they would drink coffee, they would drink actually cream with coffee, not coffee with cream. So whatever they could do to get lots and lots of fat into the system, they did. So they gave them hash browns, high in fat, right? Salami, cheese, cream, ice cream, margarine, butter, lots of fat. That was one group. Then they had a second group of medical students, and for the next 2 weeks they gave them sugar and pastry and candy and white bread, bananas, some baked potatoes, brown rice, oatmeal. This is the kind of a high, what we call carbohydrate diet, actually refined carbohydrate diet, right? And then they checked the results after 2 weeks. Guess what happened? The group with the most fat, 70%, 7 out of 10 healthy, slim medical student turned into diabetics in 2 weeks. You can create diabetes in 2 weeks, maybe even in less than 2 weeks. All you have to do is pump in the fat and the grease and the oil. Do you remember someone by the name of Ellen G. White talked about we should eat more coarse food? That means unrefined food. And to be very careful with fats, grease, and oil. How did she know this? 1935, a famous physician in England did a similar study, and he found that the more fat more fat in the diet, the higher the blood sugar levels. When he told people cut back on your fat, the blood sugar levels dropped in diabetics. That was 1935. Now I'll take you to the last 30 years. Here you see a study in Colorado. They had 134 pre-diabetics. They followed them for 3 years, and they found that the people that became diabetics actually were the ones that had the most fat in the diet. Then Harvard, they studied 85,000 pre-diabetics, and they followed them for 16 years. These are studies that have taken hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. These are huge studies using the best scientists that we have. So they followed these 85,000 pre-diabetic nurses, followed them for 16 years, and out of these people, 3,300 became full-blown diabetics, and they found that 91% was related to their lifestyle, overweight. Overweight. Those that were the heaviest were 40 times more commonly becoming diabetics when they were only pre-diabetics before. So weight is, again, the big issue here. Then you have another study coming to us, sometimes called the DPP, the Diabetes Prevention Program, where they measured, they checked out 3 different things. Listen to this. This was done in some 27 big university centers. They had some 3,000 obese pre-diabetics. They followed them for 3 years. Listen to this very carefully. They divided these 3,000 people into 3 groups at random. So 1/3 of these people didn't do anything for them. They said, eat whatever you want, whatever you've been doing, keep doing it. You're the control group. Then they had a second group, and they said, we give you metformin, which is the most commonly prescribed diabetes drug. And then they had a third group, and they said, we want you to exercise 150 minutes a week. That's all. And we want you to lose a few pounds. Over the next year, we want you to cut back on some of your extra weight. And what happened? 29% of the people in the control group, 29% became diabetics in 3 years. What did we say? 29% became diabetics in 3 years. Then the people that were taking the metformin, only 21% became diabetics. Are you with me there? So the metformin was actually good, right? Because without metformin, 29% would become diabetics. With metformin, with the drug, only 21% would become diabetics. But then they looked at the people that made the lifestyle change, just some walking and a little bit of weight loss, and it was now only 14% would become diabetics. So the lifestyle, even a very simple, humble, not very dramatic lifestyle change, dramatically reduced the likelihood of becoming diabetics, much more powerful than using these metformin drugs. So what's the conclusion? If you want to do something about your diabetes, do something about exercise and do something about your diet to lose weight. This was just a very small, not a small change that people made. We can do much better than that. As a matter of fact, I want everyone that is diabetic to exercise for 1 hour a day. And after every meal, I would like to encourage you to have a 5 to 10 minute walk immediately after the meal. If you have your meal here in the cafeteria, you're finished, go for a walk, 5 to 10 minutes. Every time that you have a meal, 3 times a day, twice a day, take a small walk. Immediately. In addition to this, try to get in about 10,000 steps a day, which is about 1 hour of walking or exercise. That would be very, very powerful in helping you. So then there's another big study at Harvard, and this time they looked at 200,000 people. They followed them for 10 years, and they found that those people who ate at least 2 ounces of processed red meat, so they found that eating 2 ounces of processed red meat a day increased diabetes by 50%. Meat increases diabetes because meat is high in fat and has no fiber. And there could be some other reasons why meat is bad for you, but this is very, very clear. And then they gave these people, instead of red meat, they gave them a whole grain dish, and the diabetes came down by 35%. We can turn diabetes on, we can turn diabetes off. It all depends on the choice that you might make of how you want to eat and live. This is a very important slide. I want to go over that very quickly with you here. These are whole foods. They're fine. Even sugar, as you find in fruit, is fine. We don't worry about giving people that are diabetics sugar in the form of fruit. If you want to have some fruit, have 2 or 3 fruits a day, but always make sure that you have some fibrous type food with that. So if you want to have some oranges, make sure you take some brown rice with it or some barley, and you have lots of beans with lots of fiber with it, and everything is going to be very, very fine. So fruits are fine. These are whole foods, not fruit juices, not refined fruits. Then you have whole foods here. These are the starchy foods. They have lots of fiber. There's no problem there. But once you refine them and you turn them into white flour, these are the bad carbs. These are the good carbs because the good carbs have fiber. The bad carbs have no fiber. That's the magic. So we know how to create the disease. Can we reverse it? Well, let me just give you some examples here. This goes back to 1933, where a physician in Montreal took people off the high-fat diet, and within weeks, 24 out of 100 of these diabetics on insulin were off the insulin just because they made some changes in their diet. 1955, Dr. Inder Singh took 80 patients on insulin. These are diabetics on insulin, and he gave them a very low fat. You see 10%, 11% fat? This is sort of the Ornish program. This is sort of the SLCM program. This is a program that we kind of recommend too for diabetics. A very low-fat diet, whole foods, foods as grown, and within 6 weeks, 50 out of 80 patients with diabetes on insulin were off their insulin, and they were no longer diabetics. How many weeks? 6 weeks. What percentage? 50 out of 80. And over the next 18 weeks, 85% of these type 2 diabetics were no longer diabetics. And then people come and say, so then now they can eat anything they want to eat? No. Then they go back to become diabetics. The diabetes is related, is dependent on how you nurture the body. Just look, 85% of diabetics on insulin can be off insulin in 18 weeks. And 50 out of 80 of these diabetics in 6 weeks. That's 62% of the people can be off their medication. Here's a pretty good program. 74% of the patients with diabetes on drugs were off their drugs in less than 4 weeks. I was right there. I worked at the Predican Center. I was the director of education there. Then you have Dr. Neil Barnard. The book was written several years ago now, The Scientifically Proven System for Reversing Diabetes Without Drugs. What does he recommend to the people? Eat foods as grown, simple foods. He recommends fruits, vegetables, whole grain. How do you know all of this? Did you read his book? You see, it's all the same potato. What is good for the heart is good for the diabetes, is good for the overweight. It's good for the prostate cancer. And so here you see Dr. Barnard, 71% of his diabetic patients were able to stop their medication in 26 days. Here's a CHIP program. We had 525 diabetics, and within 30 days there were only 301 diabetics. What happened to the other 224? What do you think happened to them? They all died? No, it was no longer diabetes. Okay? So 43% in our program, no longer diabetics. Now, I want to take the last 10 minutes and show you a film. This film will clinch it for you. This is from our CHIP series. This is part of the program that we show around the world where people enroll in a CHIP program, which is 19 lectures. Let me show you.
Hello, I'm Dr. Roger Greenlaw, and I would like to share with you a story from my practice. We'll be hearing about the health benefits of a high-fiber diet in a 76-year-old woman with multiple lifestyle-related diseases.
It had started several years ago, maybe 25, 30 years ago. I began gaining weight. That's the first thing I noticed. And with that weight gain, I developed some high blood pressure, and soon the doctors were talking to me about high cholesterol. And not too long after that, I started to develop what I thought were cardiovascular symptoms. I was very, very tired. I couldn't walk very much of a distance before I had to sit down. I would be out of breath. Very soon after that, I developed symptoms of diabetes. After several years of that, I started to have even more complications that come with high blood pressure and diabetes. I started to have eye problems, what they call diabetic retinopathy. So I did go to a nephrologist, and he suggested that my kidney function tests indicated that I was going into kidney failure. In fact, I was at stage 4. which sort of puts you right at the edge of needing dialysis and or a kidney transplant. Finally, one Sunday, I lost vision in my right eye, and at the same time had a problem with my right arm. There was some pain there, and I couldn't use it very easily. So then they ran more serious tests and finally did an angiogram. And at that time, they found many, 7 or 8 blood vessels that needed to be replaced, and then went out to tell my husband and daughter they would have to do open heart surgery and take veins from my leg and replace those blocked blood vessels in my heart. And they did that in short order. In addition to what I saw as very serious health problems, I did start to develop some digestive problems along the way. And I took some over-the-counter type medications for that, and it didn't seem to help much. So by the time that I made an appointment to see Dr. Greenlaw and talk about the colonoscopy, I also had many other digestive problems to discuss.
Now I would like to tell you about the medications that Beverly was taking. She was on 4 different medications for high blood pressure. One of them causes potassium to be lost from the body, so she was also taking a potassium supplement. In addition, she was on a trial of Lipitor for cholesterol elevation. Let's focus for a moment on Beverly's diabetes. She was insulin dependent, not only taking long-acting insulin every day, but several times during the day, she required injections of regular insulin to control her blood sugars. And remember, she had complications of her diabetes.
I had so many things that I really didn't know what to work on next to try to keep under control. I was so worried about myself and how I was feeling and what I was going to do if this thing progressed, or if I couldn't get those kidneys under control, or if the veins that they had replaced the arteries with in my heart blocked again. So I really was in a hopeless situation, and I knew I had to make some firm decisions and life changes.
In our discussions, it was obvious to Beverly, and it was obvious to me, that she had exhausted all the traditional medical interventions that could help with her diseases and complications. She was asking me, what could I do that would improve my situation? Now, we talked about lifestyle change, her nutrition, her exercise, what stresses were going on in her life. And could she make some changes that might begin to address her diseases? And she was interested. I recommended that she try the CHIP program, and she agreed. As Beverly and I talked about lifestyle change, therapeutic lifestyle change, we talked about her multiple diseases and how the CHIP program could address all of those. The idea that if you treat one problem with a lifestyle change, you begin to treat all problems simultaneously that are lifestyle related. And that seemed like a perfect idea for Beverly's situation. Now for the really fun part of this story. Beverly signed up to take the CHIP program in September and October of 2009, and I would like to share with you some of her laboratory data. In the beginning, her cholesterol was 263, and after the CHIP program, it was down to 170. When we looked out 5 months later, it was 202, and a year after that, 178. It is not unusual for people's numbers to improve with some ups and downs over time, and she has continued to improve. Notice her weight loss at the end of the CHIP program was 15 pounds, 5 months later, 25 pounds, and then in February, a year later, 40 pounds off, and in June of 2012, 57 pounds off, and that's where she leveled out. Notice the dress size going from 18 to 16 to 14 and then 12, and now she's shopping in the size 8 to 10 rack.
Then I noticed that I could eat a great deal without taking more insulin. The other thing I noticed is I seem to be losing weight, eating more, but losing weight. And that gave me some encouragement. I think probably just in the first weeks, I lost 10 pounds or more. As I became more involved with the program, I noticed that I could get the blood sugar levels under control. That was a big thing for me. And I was feeling a lot better.
The big story here is that she's off insulin and controlling her diabetes with metformin and lifestyle change alone. And let's not forget that Beverly was suffering from severe complications of her diabetes. With the taking of the CHIP program, the laser treatments stopped, and over the next 2 or 3 years, not one laser treatment was necessary. Her ophthalmologist was stunned at that result because that is so seldom seen in traditional medicine.
Then the neuropathy, that was a problem. In the auditorium where we had our CHIP program, there were steps, and every time we went to our seats or got up to get water or have a break, we would use those steps, and I needed help a lot of the times because I couldn't feel the steps. The steps themselves in my feet, with my feet. If I couldn't see them, I wouldn't know they were there. And so someone noticed and gave me some help when I needed to get up out of my seat. And now it's so different because even if I change socks and I have heavier socks on or lighter socks, I can feel the fibers in the socks, and it was something I couldn't feel before. Just recently, the doctor checked my feet with the little wire to see how your neuropathy is, if it's progressing, and he could find no evidence of it at all.
Neuropathy is something most people would say is not able to be improved by medical therapy. You would use pain medicine to control the discomfort, but you would not expect neuropathy to go away. And in Beverly's case, her neuropathy steadily improved till it is now no longer an issue in her life. Incidentally, her heartburn improved within 2 weeks of starting the CHIP program.
I would have been happy before I started CHIP if any of the diseases that I've talked about would have been helped, even to any degree. That's how desperate I was. And now I see that not only the diseases were, some of them reversed, all of them improved, that's for sure, but it changed me as a person. I see myself sort of as CEO and president and chairman of the board of all the decisions that are made for my body, and do everything I can to make the right decisions day by day.
Beverly is 85 years now. No diabetes, no angina pain, no acid reflux, no medications. She had 7 bypasses. Her heart is working fine. She's a new person. 85 years of age. I talked to her the other day. She said, I'm so grateful because I was praying 8 years ago when I met Dr. Greenlaw that somebody would take me to a medical or health program that would turn these diseases around. Now I feel I got the education, I understand, I can do it with God's help.